Hey everybody, it's Tom Land. I just wanted to respond to these two questions. How might the technology of the future be good for democracy? How might the technology of the future be bad for democracy? Now, what is compelling about these questions is that they invite us to clarify what we understand by the terms technology and democracy if we're going to arrive in a cogent manner at a response. And classically, the notion of technology is often sort of seen as explained away instrumentally. Technology is a means to an end. It is the assemblage of materials in one way or another by the hand of human or at least sentient intentionality to assist in the accomplishment of a further end. And certainly, there's a lot to be said for that. Yet on the other hand, perhaps something subtler is in play than merely the instrumental. And in this connection, I think we might usefully attend to certain sentiments offered by Martin Heidegger in his essay, The Question Concerning Technology, in which he posits that rather than being merely instrumentality, technology is a kind of mode of revelation or revealing. That when we are deploying technology, we are endeavoring to elicit from the world a dimension or aspect of its structure which might otherwise have remained hidden. And at first blush, this may seem like an awkward manner in which to frame what's under contemplation here. But I think if you stay with it for a bit, you realize that there's actually quite a lot to approaching the issue from this alternative perspective, especially with respect to what we could broadly term modern technology, leave alone the technology of the future. Largely, I would offer that modern technology can be seen as connected with the project of science as it was cast by René Descartes and the Enlightenment broadly, where the notion is that you're going to pursue and we're going to relate with nature in order to become lords and masters over it, to dominate, to control, and to subordinate it to human ends. Now, from that casting, the next step forward to seeing technology as a mode of revealing becomes more natural. So there's a tension there. Do we really want to use the word revealing? Because does it not seem rather that it's more like an imposing of a particular vision upon the real? And the example that Heidegger uses in his essay is the relationship we might have with, he uses the Rhine, but you could take almost any river, right? And add a hydroelectric plant onto that river, and the whole complexion and relationship with it changes. Whereas previously, that natural element has a kind of autonomy. When you affix it to something like a hydroelectric plant, you negate that and impose rather a vision, or if you prefer, you try to elicit a vision or concept, which by contrast subordinates the being of that element to, in this case, the human will and the human desire for energy to extract and to control that energy. So the next moment to which we can advance from after having sort of situated ourselves as considering technology along this different line, is to ask how it's really incarnating in our present society, apart from the example that I just provided. And here I'd bring another thinker into the conversation, namely Michel Foucault, who, in his work, Discipline and Punish, or Surveiller et Punir, I think is the French original, right, offers that one of the real signatures of contemporary society is the dimension of panopticism, which he is in part drawing on Jeremy Bentham there. Jeremy Bentham, noted utilitarian, offered a blueprint for what he considered to be the ideal prison, in which you have something like a central tower which looks out upon rings of orchestrated prison cells that, by means of backlighting and other effects, are all seen from that central point, but the inhabitants of those cells cannot see back. So you have the watcher and the watched, arrayed in a manner that, as Foucault puts it, the seeing, being seen dyad is severed or dissociated. The upshot of this dissociation is a radical objectification of the people being seen. By contrast, the watcher, in a certain sense, is radically subjectivized in that he sees or she sees all. I say in a certain sense because when you look at the Panopticon as an ensemble, one of the results of its condition is that it actually depersonalizes everyone within it, including the watcher, whose function isn't really an expression of who they may actually be concretely, but merely to play a role in a certain relationship of power that denudes the inhabitants of the Panopticon of their own effective will as individuals. This motif extends beyond its capacity to be more than just a blueprint for a prison. It describes a principle which seems to be generative of technology and our relationship with it in very significant ways up to and through the present day. And we see it, we see it with the most obvious examples being things like the proliferation of cameras, closed circuit television, or the fact that your employer can ask for a random drug test, and so on and so forth. And now to tie this motif back to the alternative question of what is technology, it's more than a mere instrumentation. It's a way of relating with the world so that we can elicit from it a revelation of its structure, or perhaps rather impose upon the world a particular sense of what that structure should be. And one particular way in which this has happened has been the ascension of Panopticism throughout our society. In fact, you see that even with the internet. What is the vision which is operating there of reality with ascendant Panopticism? What is the conception not only of nature and our relationship to it, but the conception of who and what we are as human beings? Decidedly, in my view, a rather dark, rather almost sinister vision, but one which nevertheless has a kind of seduction to it. Because if human beings can be subjected to the enervating powers of the Panopticon, if they can and then in turn be ordered, classified, controlled, then the problem of nature as something which is spontaneous and beyond our capacity to control is somehow arrested. And in this regard, the project of the Enlightenment realizes a certain fulfillment. Now we can turn now to the question of democracy and whether the ascendancy of Panopticism, which seems to, I would say, fairly capture how a great deal of technology is being developed and will continue to develop in the forthcoming years. How is that good or bad for democracy? Well, what is democracy? And here, again, we are invited to challenge the first order impression of what democracy is. Because it would be a mistake, in my view, to understand the concept as merely denoting a particular legislative or institutional arrangement whereby people elect certain representatives, and then these representatives, acting in theory on the behalf of those who elected them, navigate the questions of law and order. It seems that there's something more radical being sought by the vision of democracy than merely an institutional arrangement that perhaps gives a little bit more to the idea of fair play than its historical predecessors, a monarchy or what have you. And what that more radical vision is connects intimately to the idea of the individual and providing for the individual a space in which they can flourish in their unique and perhaps unbounded potentiality. Now, a point of caution is to be invoked here, right? One can make too much of the individual if one thinks that in calling for such an inflection of their import, excuse me. If as a consequence of this move, one believes and the individual can be atomized and severed from society in an almost absolute fashion, then one has sort of actually missed the boat, in my view. Nevertheless, exactly that kind of severing was what was predominant in the account of the human being that we inherit from the political discourses of the Enlightenment, which were heavily influenced by things such as Newtonian mechanics and all the rest of it. And then you can look at social contract theory itself as growing out of this idea that we are just so many atoms in the void, so many cogs in a machine, or what have you. Human being is still fundamentally a social entity, a circumstance which can be illumined easily enough, even if you just sort of look at the idea of identity. And the meaning of identity is only of import within a social context. In fact, a social context is perhaps even the condition of that possibility. So the terms of the individual and the society do not stand in this sharp antagonism with each other as we might be tempted to suggest. What does all this have to do with democracy? What it has to do with democracy is that it is a vision of how we can orient or array our society in a manner which permits the individual to flourish, and in that flourishing, the society coevally or in the same way to flourish. But if we are importing a vision of reality, such as that offered by the Panopticon, or the project of domination, which seems so related to technology as we inherit it from the internet, that it seems that we are moving along a line which is antithetical to the attainment of that democratic vision. So, what I've essentially done is I've said how I've essentially begun to respond to the question, how can future technology be bad for democracy? And the way it can be bad is that it can encourage us to see the world in a way which increasingly diminishes the significance of the individual and our capacity to act, to be free on our own. And what is the reverse of the medal, right? How can future technology perhaps be good for the democratic vision? Well, it's not difficult to see that, for instance, the internet and the capacities for communication that it has given to the globe can positively inform the realization of such a vision, both in that it creates networks of interchange which affirm a vision of human society that is not bound by the constraints of historical or geographical particularity, and in this way can encourage us in moving beyond the fetters of established prejudice. However, if technology is to continue to develop in this positive way, then we perhaps need to renovate the vision of the world that is latent in its development. Because until we undertake such a renovation, even though there will be accidental and positive efflorescences or influxes where a particular instrument or array or technological item can service the realization of a truly democratic vision, those instances will likely be sort of overtaken by the broader trajectory of the project of technology as one of control and subjugation. In order, though, to depart from that vision of technology, we can't just simply look at technology. We have to look at other dimensions of our cultural universe, which sometimes are conceived of as disparate, but which in fact have an intimate connection. We have to interrogate what we mean by something like the economy, to interrogate why we feel that capitalism can service us effectively, or why we have even begun to refashion our notion of socialism as something which can be invoked to mediate or mitigate the excesses of capitalism, instead of socialism as something which can draw us to a radically different relationship with matters economic. And well, the denominator, right, what goes on beneath the question of the economic is the question of relationship that we have with each other. And ultimately, the vision of democracy is one of radical human flourishing and equality, is one that will sit in uneasy relationship with that of the inherited economic framework, which has at its root a sort of anthropology which is absolutely consonant with the disciplinary apparatus as embodied in something like the Panopticon, which has been invoked to commodify human beings. So, how can technology be good for democracy? And there are sort of twofold response to that. On the one hand, individual items of technology can possibly service the realization of a democratic project. But more importantly, the way technology can be good for democracy is that it can invite us to scrutinize those presuppositions that we are bringing to the table but which we have left unexamined and which have, as such, exercised rather unfortunate power over us unconsciously, if you like. So, lamentably, it's not a short response that I've given here, but I felt a certain measure of elaboration was warranted given the weight of the question. I'll wrap it up there. I just want to thank you for listening, and certainly invite your own responses, and hopefully this can forward a conversation which allows us to move to a different, more embracing perspective. Thank you.